There's two things that I wish most couples understood when it comes to bumps in the road, conflict, arguments. The first one is that conflict does not actually come out of nowhere. It's not just random. It actually comes from a co-creation of both people coming together. And the second thing is that I wish more people understood that it's rarely one person's fault. In terms of the conflict that occurs. And so I'm going to talk about this today and why this is the case. How I talk about relationships and teach about relationships in terms of, the new paradigm or evolutionary relationships, which can sound kind of, people don't really know what that means. I'm going to break it down in this video. It's really the beginner understanding, right? Right off the bat, that a relationship is created by two people coming together, and each individual person has all of their baggage, all of their patterns, all of their triggers, all their childhood stuff, their relationship with their mother and their father, that you better believe actually shapes how we show up to relationships and life in general. And so, this is why understanding the subconscious and all of the conditioning, all of the programming, all of the patterns that we run aren't typically conscious to us. This is all running behind the scenes in the subconscious. And so I'm just going to say something that you may have heard before, which is absolutely true. And rather than get intimidated by this, I want you to have a growth mentality such that once you know this, you can really start to do work and inner work that has the biggest bang for your buck. And so that this statistic is something you might have heard before, which is 95% of our reality and certainly our relationships are shaped by the subconscious, not by our conscious awareness. And so I'll give you an example right off the bat. Let's talk about conflict, right? In a relationship between a man and a woman, in a partnership, and as a couple. If I, as a woman, have a history of having an abusive father, that is going to color my lens that I see men with a very thick layer, typically, of distrust, of maybe anger, of hurt, of fear, and all of the other things that actually you experienced as a child with that kind of a father. And so your lens through which you view men is colored by this. Every single thing that you were taught through your experiences in life is shaping your view of men and all men. Right. And so this is why we do this inner work to be able to really do the work to go back and see what are our patterns, what types of partners are we attracting, what types of situations and relationships am I over and over again navigating with people. This is how we can start to open the door to our subconscious and start to really look at our patterns, because that is what we are bringing to every relationship that we have on both sides with both people. And so this is why doing the inner work and oftentimes going back to our childhood, thinking about the relationship between with our mother and our father. There's something that I've been joking about recently with my clients and my groups, which is that there is a reason why psychologists ask right off the bat, usually when they work with a new client, to ask about the childhood, ask about the relationship with the mother and the father. These things matter, right? We see now in pop culture things like the father wound and the mother wound are being spoken about. And this is a very, very good thing. Because, I gave you an example that I actually was running and that many women who come to me can relate to that. But if you're a man watching, it's really good to think about your relationship with your mother. And if you had a mother who was abusive, or, any other type of dynamic that was unhealthy, maybe she was smothering. Maybe she was over involved. Maybe she was controlling, right? Like all sorts of different ways that our relationship with our parents impact us. Then that is going to color your relationship with women, particularly in romantic relationships. And so this is something where conflicts or bumps in the road and triggers that we have are really, really useful to be able to take a step back to actually look and see what's going on our side of the street so that we can take responsibility. Now, the best case scenario is in a partnership, right? Between a couple. If both people can have this understanding that, hey, I'm not a perfect person unless I've done heavy duty, shadow work or therapy directly on my relationship patterns, my childhood imprinting, etc. That stuff's most likely going to be leaking into my relationship until I take personal responsibility to look at my stuff. Then this is going to continue to repeat in your relationship with your partner, right? And also we can zoom out to all relationships and pretty much your life in general, right? So when people come to me to work one-on-one and to do this work to unpack it, it's something that, yes, we can really target your relationship with your partner, if that's what you come to me for support with, and that will take you very far. But then we start to also zoom out to see where is this pattern or this thing that's running in your subconscious also leaking out into other areas of your life, maybe your career, maybe your friendships, right? It really is something that we can find in other places as well. So when we start to become aware of how our conditioning, our programming, our trauma, our wounds are currently running in the background and shaping our relationships in particular, this is the form of true empowerment. And it is where I think, if you're going to do the inner work, especially if you're someone who comes to me and you're really interested in improving your relationships, this is where it's really beneficial to spend your time. And it's very, very useful to work with a professional like myself or someone else who can help you, who's an expert in actually doing this with people, because these are what we call our blind spots. The subconscious or the unconscious by definition it's what's hidden from us. We actually can't see it clearly oftentimes unless you're very much trained in how to actually look at the shadow, look at the subconscious. And there is a certain amount of work that you can do on your own. But the benefit of working with someone like me who does this all day long with people is that very, very quickly I can help you to see and give you the tools that you need to start to heal these things so that they don't continue to run your life in the background. And so if a couple comes together and they have a basic level of understanding that, hey, we're coming together with all of our stuff that maybe we haven't fully worked through yet, right? And it's not actually necessarily about you. It's more about me actually looking to see what is going on under the hood and what can I take personal responsibility for in terms of continuing to heal and do my inner work over here, ideally with a professional, right? So that when we come back in relationship, it can be healthier, right? And so even you don't have to ever be fully healed. The relationship itself will provide the material of the things that get stirred up in relationships that you can then take to your inner work. In fact, I believe, and I teach frequently about how relationships are one of the number one vehicles that will actually, this is why relationships exist on a higher spiritual level of evolution, because relationships will stir up all of our stuff so that we can see our blind spots, so that we can then say, hey, wow, okay, I think I need to do some more healing over here. This is triggering a wound, right, that I need to take responsibility for. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to do this work so that I can show up to my relationships in a more healed way, in a way that's less triggered, right? And so we don't ever need to be 100% perfect, but this is where even a basic level understanding of the subconscious, of how to do shadow work, of recognizing that triggers are not an excuse to point the finger at the other person, right? But actually something that's inviting us in to a deeper level of self-awareness. It's huge, right? So this is why I call relationships evolutionary or conscious relationships, because they can make us more conscious about what's running in the background. So this is powerful work, right? In my own life, once I realized that relationships are actually here for a purpose, to be able to stimulate this work, right? This is why I believe relationships exist. They're not just here because they're fun to have, or on the other hand, drive us crazy. They're actually here for a reason, which gets into the higher spiritual levels that I teach about and work with clients and groups on. But just for the sake of this video, if two people can come together and understand that we are not working with a blank slate here, there's a lot of stuff that we're pulling in from our backgrounds, and this is shaping the relationship at large, and most certainly when it comes to conflict. And so it's very, very hard to just point the finger at the other person and blame them for 100% of what's going on when we actually have this understanding that it's really useful for both people to take a breath and understand that there's typically stuff on both sides that can be looked at and worked with, right? And I'll just give you an example that I use often when I teach, because a lot of people who come to me are running the same patterns that I had to overcome. There are people who really need to work on boundaries, maybe assertive communication, people who maybe have need to bolster, right, their self-worth or their self-love. This is a typical pattern of people that come to me. This was me, years ago and what I had to heal from. And so, what I had to own in my relationships, which definitely wasn't working, is that I was allowing a lot of mistreatment to happen in the relationship. My bar was set very low. I didn't know what a boundary was. I didn't know that we could have standards in relationships. And so I was putting up with a lot of behavior and treatment that just didn't feel good, right? It actually was disrespectful. It wasn't kind. It wasn't loving. And it's not that this was happening 100% of the time, but it definitely was the flavor of certain things that didn't feel good and that weren't working in the relationship and the source of conflict and butting heads. And while most of the time I kind of wanted to avoid conflict, when we did get into conflict, it was because I had put up with stuff for so long that I would then kind of explode. And so when everything crashed and burned, this was, in a very long relationship for almost 20 years. We were together. Um, One of the keys that I want to share with you today that my therapist helped me to see was that on my side of the street, what I could own, right? This is where we have to hold both sides. It's not like those things weren't happening. It's not like I didn't need to say the things that were happening that didn't feel good at all. But on my side of the street, I didn't know what a boundary was. I was a much more passive communicator. I let a lot of things slide and go under the rug. So, what I had to learn was I had to learn about boundaries. I had to develop my self-worth so that I could even set a boundary in the first place. I had to learn how to become a more assertive communicator. I had to understand that running away from conflict is not going to help, that I needed to learn the skills to face conflict in a more healthy way. I was the queen of sweeping things under the rug that I didn't want to deal with. And that is not going to solve any problems, I assure you. In fact, all of that stuff accumulates into a giant mountain that sometimes becomes a volcano that erupts and damages everything. And so I do this work because the things that I wasn't aware of, and it's not that I'm like beating myself up, but I wasn't aware of these things. And so they did create the destruction of that marriage. And so this is why I teach of like, wow, I do really wish that I knew these things. And so ideal best case scenario, just to start to wrap up, is when two people come together, they have this understanding, hey, this relationship is not being created from a vacuum. We are two people coming together and shaping the relationship, which, in the spiritual traditions, we call this the third thing. The third thing, this is where it actually gets kind of esoteric. I'm not going to go there today. But my work is very spiritual. But just even if you don't believe in any of that, clearly you're creating the third thing, which is unique to you and that other person only, will never be replicated with any other person because by definition, it's you. It's the other person shaping the third thing. That's the relationship. And so, therefore, by definition, it actually is your contribution and the other person's contribution. It doesn't mean that we have to have shame, right? When stuff comes up that we need to look at and own, right? If I know that my father wound is influencing my relationship with men, you better believe it is to my It's to my benefit as well as all the men in my life for me to be able to look at that, to heal, to understand not all men are bad, not all men are going to hurt me. There are good men, right? Men are trustworthy. It's my responsibility too to learn about who's healthy, who's not, develop discernment, have boundaries. I could go on and on and on. This is my side of the street. This is the only thing that I have control over, right? And so this is work that I do deeply with clients and usually in just a session or two, right? Even if you just book a free intro call with me within that short time, if I know a little bit about your history and your patterns, I can help you almost immediately to spot these things so that you have something rich to work with, so that you have something that actually, if you spend your time there, this will be the biggest bang for your buck, as I typically say, right? Because I don't want you to get confused by all the relationship advice out there. I want you to use your time wisely. I want you to go to the thing that really matters. And so this is the work that I do with clients. It's very targeted, it's very specific, and it gets results and it changes the whole game when it comes to relationships. And so just to wrap up, I just want to tell everybody, I wish couples understood this. This is the last thing I'll just say to wrap up is that it's really about having a growth mindset of like, okay, we're two people that are human. We're coming together, and yes, all of our stuff's going to come up. This is every relationship. Unless the other person is a carbon copy of you, stuff is going to come up because there's differences, right? This is where it gets into working with polarity and resonance, and these are more advanced teachings that I've shared on the podcast and other places. But this is something that you can just expect. It's part of the nature of relationships, right? So we can either feel victimized by this, or we can actually move into empowerment of like, hey, I see this thing over here on my side. It keeps coming up time and time and time again. It's actually becomes less about the other person and more about what this is showing me that I can actually lean into to be able to look at with clear eyes. So I would love to hear in the comments if you work with relationships in this way, right? Or if this is new for you and you have any questions, please let me know. And if you would like to do this work that can completely change your relationships and really your whole life, please reach out to me. I have been doing this work for 15 years as a psychologist, both one-on-one with people and in groups. And I am really devoted to relationships, especially romantic ones. And part of my mission is to heal the relationship between men and women. There's much, much, much that we can do. So, yeah, lots of love, everyone. I hope this was helpful. Talk to you soon.